So we have an all Wales contract in place for the provision of insulin pumps and CGM currently. We have 5 suppliers on the framework, and that framework actually expires the end of October this year. So we need the new framework, the new contract to be in place by the 1st of November, which might seem as if it's quite a long way away. But in terms of the size of the piece of work, actually, we're going to have to re-put our skates on to get it delivered in time. And what you can see is different in terms of the new approach to the tender is that we're also going to be including an element of technology, and that wasn't included on the previous framework. So we've now created an all Wales working group, and we've conducted some scoping so far at individual health board level. And it was important at that stage that we cast the net very, very wide to speak to as many people as were able or wanted to actually speak with us. So we met with clinical leads from each of the health boards. We did some supplier engagement to understand the appetite within the market for the interest in our new tender. And we then contacted other procurement organisations across the UK to find out about their own approaches to this particular pathway. And all that stage in terms of scoping is very much information gathering. There's no decisions made at that point. So we then need to establish what we call a working group, and that is the decision-making group for the tender. And I've just put a snapshot of the working group up on the screen for you to see that we have adults and peds representatives from each of the health boards. We have some procurement nurses where those are available in the health boards. We have the strategic leads, so we have Dr. Julia Platts and John. And also we are going to ask that we have a support from NWIS to join the working group. And NWIS will be particularly important in terms of helping us to spec these technology type of products that we're going to come on to shortly. So that's the kind of all Wales working group that we've got in place. And I have issued some comms to each of the clinical leads about the scoping exercise that we've conducted. And that includes all of the findings that came out of the health board discussions. It lists the suppliers that came forward to speak to us. So if you haven't had a copy of those comms and you'd like a copy, if you speak to John or myself, we can certainly make sure you're included on the circulation list for these type of comms going forward. So when we look at the tender, we break the items on the tender down into segments and we call these lots. So the first lot will be for insulin pumps with integral CGM. The second lot is insulin pumps without integral CGM. The third lot will be standalone CGM. The fourth lot we're calling personal diabetes management systems, and that's the kind of patch type pumps that we are currently having provided by Insulet. And then lot 5 is the provision of IT specific to the insulin pump therapy and CGM. And here we're looking at things like the data visibility portals that are provided by, for example, Diasend. And Roche have recently come to the market with a new product, which again is vendor neutral. So where a supplier isn't able to offer their own download visibility type of data, we've got these standalone provisions here. And what we can see in the activity elsewhere in the UK is that these haven't actually been included in the pathway. And we believe that's absolutely integral to you understanding and managing diabetes. So we definitely want to include them. And what we can see here, interestingly enough, and obviously isn't on the previous tender, is apps which are specific to the control of pumps. So I had a discussion with Julia Platts and with John regarding apps and how or if we would include them on the tender. And we've decided that we're only going to ask for apps which are specific to the control of pumps. And that's because we don't want to open the floodgates, if you like, to the wider arena of apps that would be very, very difficult for us to manage and validate. And also, interestingly, if we didn't have this type of criteria, this type of lot, for example, CamDiab, who've come to the market with an app, the CamFX, which controls an insulin pump, they wouldn't be able to bid in these previous lots. So where we can see that we have a dynamic change in the market, we need to make sure that when we're looking at this lot structure, it does enable suppliers for something new and different to the market to come on board with our tender. So that's interesting. So the current position is we are now in the process of compiling the briefing paper. And that needs sign off by Welsh Government. Now, prior to that, it will be circulated to all of the heads of the procurement teams in each of the health boards, and they will discuss that with the directorate just to make sure that everybody's happy with the proposals of the briefing paper. And following the working group meeting, we're going to be looking at what we call a multi-supplier framework. And that means that any of the suppliers that pass the criteria to get onto the tender will be awarded onto the contract. And you can then choose which of those suppliers you want to use. It's very important that we ensure this framework provides the clinical choice that you need and aligns with the NICE guidelines. And the appetite from the early supplier engagement indicated there'll be about 12 or 13 suppliers that will want to come on board. So it's going to be a significantly different landscape to the current tender or the current contract, which has 5 suppliers currently. In addition, I've held a meeting with the strategic leads recently. One of the key things to come out of that meeting is the importance of understanding how the national landscape can fit with our own tender. And really a call to arms to say, from my perspective, if there are things happening nationally, please consider and review how they could impact and benefit our own tender, because we're at the stage now where we have the opportunity to build in this criteria and get this tender right. In terms of the working group, we are now looking at the specifications for the tender, and this is an extremely detailed, methodical piece of work. So within each of the lots I've indicated previously, we'll break down that requirement into about 10, 12, 13 subsections. So we don't just look about the type of product we're going to be buying, we look at the whole infrastructure of supply. What I also want to do with the specification this time is look at maybe capturing some data that hasn't been visible across Wales previously. So for example, we can insist that all of the suppliers that pass onto the framework provide us with some data regarding breakdowns, warranties, pumps that have been swapped out, etc., so that we can start to have an all Wales picture of the performance of this contract. Because I do feel at the moment that we don't have a great amount of all Wales visibility, that some of this criteria is known only at health board level and doesn't give us an all Wales picture. So the next slide gives you a snapshot of the type of detail that we have within the specification. And it's just to show you, I suppose, the magnitude of this piece of work so that you've got some understanding of the work that's being tasked to your particular representatives within your health board. So we tell the supplier what the criteria is. We ask them to confirm whether they agree or not, and we can stipulate whether some of these requirements are mandatory. So, for example, we're going to be asking for standard deliveries to be made free of charge. If the supplier doesn't agree with that, then they'll be ejected from the tender process at that time. We can have a look at everything to do with supply and distribution, data, pump functionality, after sales and reports, support, training, a whole raft of criteria. And that's what the working group have been tasked at looking at currently. And I'm sure they'll be going back to their respective teams and taking on some comments and understanding wider input into the specification. So that was a kind of overview. I'm aware I didn't want to go into too much detail today because it can be very procurement specific. I just wanted to give a kind of overview, if that's okay.
Thank you, Mel. I don't know if anyone has any questions. Certainly, I know that, you know, we've, as you say, we've all got a representative on your group now, and hopefully we're just sharing more information and getting more understanding. But for those of you who haven't heard Mel before or weren't aware of this, I wondered if anyone had any questions. Seems like you've explained it to everyone's satisfaction.
That's fine. It's a lot to take in. In terms of comms, if there's anybody on the call today who isn't on my circulation list for comms regarding the contract, the current contract and the new All Wales tender, then please let me know, as I do put bullet points, information, snapshots out periodically, which will help you understand where we are in the tender process. I'm aware I don't capture everybody on those, and I can only include people if people let me know that they're interested in having them. But it is a good way for you to find out what's going on with the whole pathway, the current tender and the new one as well.
Fabulous, thank you. So yeah, just hang on, I've got a hand up, but can you identify yourself? Oh, it's Shika. Shika, have you got a question?
Yes, I do have a question. I would like the copy of the comms, please, if that can be circulated to me. But
Ab
so I'm one of the consultants in Bridgend, Prince of Wales Hospital. My full name is Shika Jain. So
Lovely.
you, yeah. The question which I had was, how does this All Wales contract infiltrate to health boards? Because we have a problem with CGM in our health board. The pump funding is not a problem, but there is definitely a financial issue about CGM. Um, so I don't know, because it seems that the always tender is for CGM as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And what we do in terms of a procurement perspective is we will, if you like, set up the contracts with the suppliers, but it would be up to the individual health boards to decide which of the items on the framework they would absolutely like to access. So because centrally we don't have any control over the pathway, all we can do is really open up the contract to make sure all the current suppliers are on there. And that came out of the recent working group. I think one of the Betsy representatives asked absolutely the same question, where we can see some of the health boards have quite extensive use of CGM and other health boards, not so much. But really, that wouldn't sit within my remit. So my remit is to make sure that we have the suppliers that provide CGM on the contract, and then it would be up to your individual directorate to decide, or if they wanted to use them or if they can use them. Has that answered your question?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Okay,
Thank you,
thank you.
Shika.
Thanks, Shika. Did anybody else have any other questions for Mel? We've got no more hands up, so thank you. There's somebody's put in the comments that they would like to be copied into the Alex Murphy and Clontarf would like to be copied into the comms, please. But if anybody does want to just email, perhaps email John and we can then forward your details to Mel and get you added onto the emailing list.
Absolutely. And it could be anybody, clinical or administrative, everybody, because I'm really keen to get the comms out so that people aren't, if you like, shocked when the new tender is in place and they really weren't aware of it. We absolutely need to avoid that situation. So please, anybody at all, these are not confidential comms, let me know.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming to talk to us. Thanks for your
Thanks a lot.
time, Mel. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.